All right, welcome everybody to our first lunchtime webinar. We're giving this time a try out to see how it works for some people. Today we're going to talk to you about black skimmer biology and behavior and some of their movements that we've been learning about from our banding project that we started in 2017. You're going to hear from me, you're going to hear from Liz, and you're going to hear from Silas today. This is a cooperative project that we launched with Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and the trustees and our other partners, the town of Edgartown. And you'll learn more about that as we move along. So, a little bit about skimmer biology. We are talking about a bird that's quite unique today. Skimmers are the only bird in that you will ever see that has a beak with a lower mandible longer than the upper mandible. There are African skimmers and Indian skimmers, and then we have the skimmers that we see here, the North American skimmers. And North American skimmers or American skimmers are in different populations. This Atlantic coast population that we study is strictly coastal, but there's also skimmers in South America that are strictly interior, and also the African and Indian skimmers are interior species, meaning that they're nesting on big sandbars in rivers, but only our skimmers are nesting along the coast. And their beak that they have that's so unique is adapted for their foraging strategy, where they're skimming along the surface and they're a tactile feeder where they're dragging that lower beak in the water until it bumps into a fish, and then they can immediately snap down that upper mandible to grasp a fish, and then they can eat it and keep doing that. They're colored just like other birds in their family. They're in the family Laridae, and that in that family you'll find gulls, you'll find terns, skimmers, and noddies, and all of them are usually in they're water birds, and a lot of them eat fish, different types of foraging strategies. But many of them you'll notice are colored, can be colored, especially in gulls, dark above and white below, in that they're foraging along the surface of the water. The other unique characteristic of skimmers is their eye shape. In their eye, they're the only bird species that has a vertical pupil, which is pretty shocking. And I actually only learned that recently. When you're handling skimmers, we're not necessarily looking carefully in their eyes, but they have a vertical pupil because of the areas that they forage and where they live. It's a high glare environment to be foraging on the water. And they're also foraging a lot at dawn and dusk where there's limited light, and at night. And so that vertical pupil really helps them deal with the light refraction and also the lack of light at times. I wanted to show you a little example of the Larid family here in a colony. So we've got terns in the background. This is at Eel Pond. And also in this video, you can see an example of another kind of unique behavior that skimmers exhibit. They like to they lay flat on the sand versus sitting upright on their nest. And you can see there's a bird already laying flat in this colony, and this one just settled in. And you really don't see any other birds exhibiting that behavior except for skimmers. They are colonial nesters. So, except when they first colonized the island, which Liz is going to talk about later, but typically they're in a large colony. And they arrive on the nesting grounds. Usually they can arrive as early as April, but it's often May. And then they will hang out and they'll start to amass in their colony. Males and females will then start to spend more time in close proximity to one another before they start courting. Courtship involves the male presenting the female with a fish, usually. In the picture down on the lower right here, you'll see what is actually a male and a female skimmer. The male is on the right. He's a larger bird. He's got a heavier bill. And then the female is on the left. And you can see she's smaller. She's got a daintier bill. The male's often doing more provisioning than the female, but both of them are involved in feeding young. Black skimmers will nest on bare sand in our environments, but they'll also nest like down in New Jersey in areas where there's big salt marshes and there's islands in those salt marshes. They will nest on like seaweed piled up in some of those sand and seaweed islands and those habitats. But here they're often in the open sand. Sometimes they're beneath a seaside goldenrod or a sea rocket or next to it, but that open sand environment, their chicks are really well camouflaged, and as are their eggs to be hidden in that environment. Their clutch is anywhere from 2 to 5 eggs, and they incubate those eggs for 23 to 25 days, which is a pretty big investment compared to like a songbird that might incubate for 9 or 10 days. But a songbird hatches out altricial young that are naked and blind and very dependent on the nest, whereas skimmers are hatching out a semi-precocial young that's feathered, they have some down. They're not moving very much in the first few days, but then they can really run and move around the parents, and they're not as dependent. The incubation begins with the first egg, and so those chicks are actually hatching asynchronously, which is also unique compared to something like a piping plover or oyster catchers, where their chicks hatch within 24 hours of one another typically. So here's just I'm circling the nest where you have eggs and chicks in the nest. Here's another video to give you an idea of what skimmer colonies look like. They do have this really unique barking behavior. Here you can see chicks of all ages running around in this colony. And you can see they're highly mobile. I'll play that for you again just so you can enjoy uh, being in the colony. All right, so the parents are feeding the young until they can fly, and actually they feed them beyond fledging, at least a couple weeks beyond fledging, and sometimes longer. The fledglings will spend time with other adult skimmers during migration. There's a nice picture here on the left of tiny little, the first, young hatchling skimmers, and you can see they're feeding them quite sizable fish. This is also a great picture to show you that how the bill looks so big and when you look at it from the side, but then if you look at this straight on view, you can see how narrow it is, and you can imagine that lower mandible cutting through the water almost like a knife to catch a fish. It's really quite lovely adaptation. As I mentioned, they're feeding chicks at dusk, sometimes at night, and often at night, and depends on where their skimmer's breeding. Apparently, they don't do that as much down in Florida. And then they're also feeding around dawn. Going to give you a little chick feeding here. You can see this really large fish that this skimmer is going to feed to this chick. They're quite good at manipulating prey. And there's also another skimmer in the background here. If you look on the upper right, that skimmers just brought a fish in too to the chicks. And so the chicks vie for food against one another. So the more aggressive chicks will get fed more frequently. It takes chicks 28 to 30 days to fledge typically, and this is what a fledgling skimmer looks like. So these guys are not quite ready to migrate, but they're definitely flighted. And after the colony has a lot of fledglings and they start to get ready for fall migration south, we often will see skimmers staging maybe at a nearby site. So we typically are seeing colonies maybe at Little Beach or at Norton Point here on the island, but they sometimes in September we might see them staging for a while out on Sarson's Island in Kentucky. And it may not just be skimmers from our colonies. That could be skimmers from Long Island and others. Birds start to move around a little bit in that pre-migration, probably part of their social interactions, perhaps opportunities for them to find other skimmers and disperse from a natal colony. It's all things that we don't necessarily know much about yet. And so skimmer migration will begins in September. And I'm going to turn this over to Liz, and she's going to talk to you a little more about our banding project and migration.
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so when you're looking at the skimmer colony here on Martha's Vineyard, you can see it's really at the northern extent of its range. So a lot of the bigger colonies are down in New York and New Jersey. They've got, 300, 400 birds. where we have a much smaller colony up here, mostly because we are at the northern extent of their range. And then you also see that the year-round population down in Florida, well, those birds will move down to Florida for the winter and along the Gulf Coast. But then they also have a year-round population or permanent population down in those areas. But skimmers used to be in Massachusetts back in the 1800s until they were extirpated, or before the 1800s, before they were extirpated. And then we didn't see skimmers back here in Massachusetts until 1985 when the skimmer was seen nesting in Plymouth, which is up here. And then they arrived in Martha's Vineyard in 2010, and have been here annually since then. And some birds have showed up on Ram Island and on Monomoy, but really the majority of the population that's nesting in Massachusetts is on the Vineyard. And they're really only at 3 locations, actually 2 locations on the Vineyard. Norton Point is a popular spot for them. It's a big barrier beach. You've got the bay and the ocean that they can feed on. But this beach also is a high energy beach and gets breached to the ocean. And then that breach then slowly eats away at the habitat. So when that occurs, they often will move. So before 2017, they were out there, then they moved to Cape Pogue. But Cape Pogue, again, is habitat is filling in with sea level rise. There's a lot of washover events. It's a very busy spot for boaters. So from there, they moved over to Little Beach, and they were there for a long time until we had heavy black-crowned night heron predation out at that site. And then they moved back to Norton Point. But really, there's only these 2 to 3 spots on the island that these birds can be, and that's part of the ecology of terns. When there's a lot of predation or habitat changes, the terns will move, or skimmers will move. Unfortunately, with sea level rise and habitat modifications, it's getting harder for these birds to find other places to go. And so these 2 spots become really valuable to these birds. I just wanted to highlight Little Beach because it's this amazing little spit of land owned by the Sheriff's Meadow Foundation in Edgartown. And it's less than a kilometer long, and you've got black skimmers, common terns, least terns, plovers, oyster catchers, willet, all piled into this little spit of land. The black skimmers like to nest near the common terns. I think it's a good backup for them. The common terns are more aggressive than the skimmers, so they have that backup against predators, especially avian predators. But unfortunately, eventually, black-crowned night herons hit this colony, and they moved over to Norton Point, which unfortunately harriers are hitting that colony, so it's tough for these birds. But when they were at Little Beach, they actually did really well, and they're doing well at Norton Point as well. But because we were able to put in this low predator fencing, and so here's a picture of that low predator fencing. So this really keeps out skunks and raccoons, and then we can trap along it if we're having a problem predator. But this really allows the colony and all the birds out there to get a good head start and maybe hatch those first nest attempts before avian predators like black-crowned night herons key too much into the colonies or the birds out there. But we really, on the breeding grounds, we do as much as we can for them. We put up fencing and protect them from disturbance, and of course, monitor them from the start of their nesting all the way until those chicks are fledged. We do what we can for predators. Avian predators are really hard to manage, but where we can, we try to manage the ground nest or the skunks and raccoons. And because of that, we really have seen over the years, and I should add, this is an effort no matter where the birds are nesting, whether they're on town property or trustees property or Sheriff's Meadow property, we're all working together to protect these birds. And because of those efforts, we've really seen the populations grow over the years. And so you can see this, the highest we've gotten is 32 pairs, but it's sort of slowly creeping up over the years. And you can also see that productivity has been quite well over the years. So these birds do very well here at hatching and fledging chicks. 2021 is an exception, and that's when we were hit really hard by the black-crowned night herons. They were coming after the common terns and then also went after the skimmers. But interestingly enough, in 2022, we still had that problem and the skimmers did really well. They were a little further outside of the colony, and I think that helped them out. And so because of this, we started to, start asking questions about our colony. How big is this colony going to get? Where do they go in the winter? Are the same chicks coming back year after year? Or the chicks that are born here, are they coming back to nest here? So in 2017, we started a banding initiative. And we teamed up with Mass Wildlife, the trustees, and then just recently the town of Edgartown, and banded chicks to answer some of these questions. And one of them was really chick survival, like how are these chicks doing once they leave the vineyard? But also, are those chicks coming back to the vineyard to nest? And will someday we have 300 and 400 pairs of skimmers here? And so kind of asking the adults, are the adults coming back? Or are they just sort of spill over and then actually joining these larger colonies down south? But also another important question is, where are they overwintering and what are the struggles that they're having on their overwintering grounds? And it's important to understand the whole life cycle of these birds. Where are they stopping over? Where are they wintering? And what's happening on the breeding grounds? And, we know a lot about what's happening on the breeding grounds, but not so much throughout the rest of their migration. And all of those factors, play into how well these birds can survive. So we began this banding project in 2017 to, get at some of these questions. And to band these chicks, basically we just walk into the colony and grab the chicks. But as easy as it sounds, there's a lot of planning and strategizing prior to walking into the colony. We do have a small colony, right? We're hovering around 20 pairs. So we really do want to be mindful of not disturbing them and not going into the colony too much. A lot of the time, these birds are nesting with other species like roseate terns or piping plovers. And so we have to really think about where those nest and how do we enter this colony without disturbing those birds. So it is a lot of planning and strategizing before we walk in and grab them. And it's a big team effort to do that. And then once we have the chicks in hand, the first thing we're doing is banding them. So this is, we use this orange band. It's field readable. That's something you'll be able to look at through a scope, possibly possibly binoculars, depending how close you can get. And that's the most important piece. So we always make sure we band the birds right away. We also put on a U.S. Fish and Wildlife silver band. And then we take all the other measurements. So we're weighing them, we're doing wing chord, tarsus, doing all of those measurements before we release them. And I just want to highlight that this is really a team effort. We want to get into the colony as quick as we can and band the birds as quickly as we can, as well as doing everything accurately and safely. So we kind of gather all the folks that have experience in this on the island and do this together so that we can band as many chicks as we can and efficiently. And then once we've done that, we release the birds, the chicks, back to their parents who have been squawking at us the whole time. And then we spend a lot of time, the most important thing is getting resites of these bands, right? There's no point in banding a bird if you're not going to get resites from them. So we spend a lot of time on the breeding gown, monitoring the chicks after they've been banded, but also, in the spring, once the birds have returned, we're looking for who came back, who's nesting, and then when are they leaving the island. So getting all of that information while they're on the breeding grounds. We also try to do our banding on double rainbow days because why not? This was last year. It was just the perfect day. And after a very successful banding operation out at Norton Point, we were left with a double rainbow, which was pretty cool. So far we have banded 68 black skimmer chicks, and 57% of them have been seen at least once after fledging, and 56% of them have been seen as adults. So that's really amazing survival to adulthood. These chicks are, doing pretty well once they leave the vineyard after being banded. And 43% have returned to the vineyard after after their hatch year. So that's also really exciting news that a lot of them are coming, the ones that are being born here are coming back to the vineyard to potentially nest or at least scope it out. And so there is hope maybe that someday we will have that huge colony here ever so slowly. But so now I'm going to pass it over to Silas, and he's going to talk more about their migration and what else we've learned off the vineyard.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Liz. So, yeah, we have all of this great information from resites and from our monitoring of the colony on Martha's Vineyard. But once they leave Martha's Vineyard, we are in the hands of observers along the East Coast and down in their wintering grounds to report information to us, and so that we can learn more about the stories. And so, once we put these bands on, we hope that people will see them and they'll report them to us. And so this is the fall migration map, and you can kind of see we've had 60 different resites since 2017 along their fall migratory route. So here we are. This is Martha's Vineyard, their breeding ground. And as we move down the Atlantic coast, you can sort of see areas that they've been popping up. And so they really hang along the coast here, or that's where the resites have been reported. And so on the fall migration, so after September, as they move down to their wintering ground, we have 25 separate locations they've been observed, 17 separate observers, and 28 individual birds. The spring migration, interestingly enough, is we've had far less resites reported. We've only had 6 resites reported since 2017 at 4 different locations from 5 observers and only 5 individual birds within that. And so this is the process that's going on right now. I'm not sure if this is due to the birds speeding up or if there's just less observation effort. Many of the people that report these resites to us do similar work that we do in terms of they have busy field seasons in the summer, and so maybe in the spring everybody's winding up and getting busy and is spending less time out on the beach observing. And many of these observations in the spring migration have been pulled from eBird observations rather than reported directly to us. And so if there was a call to action from this, if you were on their spring migratory route, spend some time looking for skimmers maybe, and we'd love to improve these numbers a little bit because they obviously go from Florida to Martha's Vineyard, and we would like to see how. And so just sort of looking at the migratory routes, and I want to point out, give a little couple shout outs to people that have given a fair amount of resites or spent a good effort or increasing it. And so I want to point out in this figure that these orange dots here are areas where we've had over 5 resites reported, and maybe these are popular stopover routes along their migratory route, but it also could just be due to some of our all-star reporters. And so Jason Smith from the New York DEC has given us 11 observations of 3 individuals. Sammy has 4 observations. Cami, not Sammy, sorry. Cami from the South Carolina DNR has reported 4 observations of 3 shepherd birds. And then we have Lindsay in North Carolina. She works for North Carolina Audubon, and she's done a staggering 31 observations of 16 different individuals. And we've heard reports of her out in September in the cold water and water sandals, getting these sites on the skimmers for us at a safe distance. And so we really appreciate these efforts. And so outside of the migratory blocks, I sort of conceptually think of these resite efforts as either migratory or on their wintering grounds. And again, so this resite data is very valuable. We're grateful for every report. And especially on these wintering grounds, we get lots of interesting information because, what we're seeing on the breeding grounds is generally all orange banded birds that we have banded ourselves. They're all from Massachusetts. They're returning to Massachusetts. But on these wintering grounds, we're getting aggregations and flocks of several hundred birds from breeding grounds in several different latitudes. And so Beth Forrest actually made, if you're on the wintering grounds or ever down in Florida during the wintering season and want to go look at some skimmers, you might get a whole kaleidoscope of different colors of banded birds. And so Beth Forrest made this great figure that can sort of inform you as to which colored band relates to which different state of breeding ground. And so we're here where this orange or this pumpkin color, I'm not seeing the mouse, orange pumpkin color is us. New York has the yellow banded birds, New Jersey's blue, Virginia's white, North Carolina is black, and the birds that stay in Florida are green. And if you get any Texas birds from any red banded birds, that would be really cool too. So a little bit more information on the Massachusetts banded birds on their wintering grounds. So of the birds that we've banded, we've had 190 individual resites from their wintering grounds since 2017. They're all sort of scattered all around Florida. There's 12 locations that we've seen a lot. But again, we're sort of having these incidences where we're seeing lots of resites from the same area. And so I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. But 18 observers in all of their wintering grounds and 30 individual birds have been reported to us. So for these highlights, Amelia Island and Huguenot Memorial Park near Jacksonville, Florida. Basically, we have our own flock of reciters that are reporting to us at that site. Pat and Doris Leary, Bruce Buckingham, Brett Moyer, Samantha Jones. Bruce has reported more individual birds than anybody else. He has 17 recites of individual birds have been attributed to him. And between those four observers, they've recited 116 birds and 21, or 116 individual recites of 20 banded birds at this location. So that's really, really cool. And then one special shout out we'll give is to Ingrid Siegert, who I believe is actually on this talk. And so she celebrating you. That's what we're doing right now. She has reported 54 individual recites. That's more than any other reciter that has been reported to us. And so I guess we'll send a trophy or something. But thank you very much, Ingrid, of 3 different birds. And all of her recites are from Mallory Square at Key West, Florida. And from her recites and all of the information she's given, we've gotten to learn a fair amount about the specific birds that I'll talk about in a second. And so I want to branch into just some of the fun individual highlights. And so A0, A7, and A8, these are all birds that were in our inaugural banding class. This is an old slide. They're actually 10 years old this summer. And these 3 birds specifically return to Martha's Vineyard annually and have been nesting since they reached breeding age, which is really cool. And so this is A8 right here. So you can see a nice picture that was taken by Jeff Bernier here of the A8. And then this is a video that we got last season with A8 and its chicks. With a little photo bomb from a Comintern there. Again, they're all mashed in there together. Oops. And then we've had some birds that are reported not returning to Martha's Vineyard, but actually nesting at other sites, which has been really cool and very exciting. We've only had 5 of our banded birds reported nesting at other sites, but there are at least 7 that have been seen in other nesting colonies. A9 is one of these that is very well documented. Luann actually used this photo to distinguish the difference between males and females. And so A9 here was the model female within this picture. She's a little bit smaller, smaller beak. She nested on Martha's Vineyard in 2019. That nest failed. She tried again in New York this time at Nickerson Beach on Long Island in 2022. And then was actually seen back on Martha's Vineyard in 2024. So she's done a fair amount of hopping around, though we weren't confirmed that she nested in 24 and we didn't see her in 2025. A4 is nested in Nickerson Beach in New York since 2021. A5 has been nesting in New York or New Jersey. Anything that has that A is part of our inaugural banding class in 2017, so they're well distributed, and it's good to see so many of those birds still alive. There's the A5 particularly nested in New York and New Jersey. E2 has been in New York since 2021. E3 in New York. All of these New York are in the same nesting colony in Nickerson Beach. And then K0 and N4 are among a nesting colony in New Jersey. These are some of our younger birds. N would have been 2023 and K series would have been 2022. And so this was actually for K0 was our first recite reported for this. And there wasn't confirmed nesting, but it was nice to know that K0 is still alive and they were among a nesting colony in New Jersey. So that's really cool to see. And then this is K2. So K2 is one of our most interesting birds and the birds that we know the most about from these band recite efforts. This is a bird that was banded in 2020, and Ingrid knows this bird very well. It spends its winters in Florida at Key West. And it's done all sorts of interesting movement around. This bird has actually been seen in 7 different states, more than any of our other birds. And some of them are not really along a migratory pathway, but actually north of Martha's Vineyard. And so in 2022, K2 returned for the first time to Martha's Vineyard after hatching in 2020. And then a week after being seen at Little Beach in Martha's Vineyard, it was seen up in Maine with its, colony mate K4. This was a subadult. They're just going and exploring different areas. Maybe they're looking for breeding range further north, possible range expansion, who knows. They were going and exploring, and it was cool to see them up in Maine just a week after showing up in Martha's Vineyard. These guys are moving around a lot. We don't actually know where K2 is nesting at this point. K2 is not a regular returner to Martha's Vineyard at any point, and so maybe at some point that will be returned to us. K2 is seen with a nest somewhere. That would be the hope. But K2 on the wintering grounds, this is more information that we've gotten from Ingrid at Key West, spends its winter with J7, and J7 is our big champion bird. It has been recited more times than any other of our banded birds, 51 individual times, many of those from Ingrid on its wintering grounds. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like on their wintering grounds at Key West. So these are all, again, photos from Ingrid. And they use really interesting areas. And so are they've really favored these concrete pilings. And you can see here in the background, there's a cruise ship that they like to hang out with. And so sort of indicative, Liz was talking about all of the protections that we have for them on their breeding grounds with symbolic fencing and monitoring regularly. But here they are on their wintering grounds, and there's cruise ships coming up and disturbing them and using the areas that they want to use. And so again, it's sort of putting into a range-wide perspective of this conservation for these species. But it is interesting to see them using these human created platforms as their overwintering sites. Thank you, Ingrid. One thing that was brought to our attention about Mallory Square that's really kind of cool is there's a resort, Ocean Key Resort, which has a webcam that you can log on to and view live at any point. So this picture was taken last week, right when I was making these slides. And you can see that all of the skimmers had begun heading north, so there's no skimmers in there now, but sometimes in the winter we can log on and see live what our skimmers are doing, or the skimmers that we've banded. Maybe they're hanging out around the pilings or the cruise docking or cruise ship docking piers. We can't quite see to the resolution where we're getting banded birds at that site, but it is cool to see what they're doing, especially when we're cooped up here in the winter during the blizzard last month. One more individual highlight includes E7, and so E7 before J7 passed it this winter was our most resighted individual skimmer at 46, and it had a very impressive migration where it went from Jacksonville, Florida, where it was overwintering and seen again on the Martha's Vineyard in just 2 months and 11 days. This is another bird where we've been able to make comparison observations and determine its sex. And so we can see here, this is J0. J0 at one point was seen right next to E7 in an observation, and Liz was able to tell that E7 was a male and J0 was a female. And then again, some of our younger birds that have already been observed several times. This is N0. I just love this photo of Rich and Kayla looking so focused. And this is little N0 getting banded right here. And so we have this from its banding day, and it's been observed at its overwintering location during migration, and back here on Martha's Vineyard already rejoining the nesting colony. And so despite only being banded in 2023, we have all sorts of information on N0 already. And so that was sort of a good overview of our analog data set of what we've done from our banding. Luann is now going to talk about some of the futuristic technology being used as she squeezes in our new Zoom room that is being done right now.
All right, back here. So we recently formed a Black Skimmer working group a few years ago, and there's a lot of us interested in Black Skimmer movements. And a lot of us have been color banding skimmers, and some people much longer than us, like Beth Forrest down in Florida, but the people in New Jersey and New York have been banding skimmers longer. So we all have a lot of recite data. It tells us about places where skimmers have been resighted, but what we don't necessarily or didn't necessarily have was a lot of fine scale movement, how long exactly are skimmers taking to move north, particularly in the spring. It could be that we have fewer spring resites because actually skimmers are making a single movement, or instead of hopscotching their way down like they do in the fall, they're just blasting their way up to the breeding ground. And so they're not really getting resighted because they're making those big movements. But anyway, so we can do just the simple recite bands to get movement and location data, but there's also newer telemetry tags out there. Satellite or cellular tags can provide us details. And one of the reasons that we want that detailed information is because there's a tremendous amount of wind energy development proposed or happening along the Atlantic coast. And while skimmers are an abundant species, we like to keep things that are common. And we'd like to know what risk wind energy poses for these birds in this offshore environment. And so the only way we're going to get that data is to actually get particular movement data from them. And so we've are looking to partner with Kate Goodenough, who's a PhD researcher. She has a Laird Research and Conservation Group that she's at University of Oklahoma now. And she's actually been tagging skimmers with different partners for a couple of years now and getting some of that more fine scale movement with the tags she's using. And so the tags can actually be attached to the skimmers with a little leg loop harnesses. And she's worked out some really great techniques now and they're reliable. The birds are coming back every summer with their tags on, and she's been doing this in New Jersey or sorry, New York, and she's been getting some really cool data. So she was kind enough to just share a couple of slides with me of her data. Here you can see on the right here, this is the fine scale movement she's got of one of her overwintering skimmers down that winters in Florida. And so you get a lot more information about where they're spending their time, how movements in between sites, time between those movements. And that's the kind of information that we could get if we actually tag a few skimmers here on Martha's Vineyard, which is what we're preparing to do. We're putting together proposals and permits to be able to maybe do that this spring, summer. So, how can you help? Well, we certainly are so grateful when people report their banded birds, wherever you are. If you like to photograph birds and you get a bird with a band, you can put it up on your social media, but we may not see it. The really best place to send in your band recite is to search for Report Banded Birds USGS, and that'll connect you with the banding lab, and you'll find a place to report a band. And you'll get a certificate from the banding lab telling you about your bird, who banded it, where it was banded. And that's really the creme de la creme place for you to report your banded bird. There's some Facebook groups down in Florida, Florida Banded Birds Facebook, but if you just post it on the bird alert, we're busy people. We're not necessarily on Facebook all the time. Lindsay, I know who's on the webinar. I just saw her. You know, she and Silas, we comb through Facebook and eBird trying to find sightings, but it really is so much easier on us if you report it to the banding lab. You can also support wildlife conservation programs. You can support us. You can support Audubon that has these types of projects. I know Lindsay's got projects going on in Audubon, North Carolina, and that's a great way to support this kind of research that we do. You can also really help us out by educating people on the beach about disturbance and the impacts of disturbance. The photo on the left was taken by Pat Leary, and it's an example of this behavior that a lot of people seem to do down south where they run into a flock of birds so they can get a picture of themselves with birds in the air around them. And you can see a lot of birds getting disturbed that way in these wintering flocks. And so just simply calmly talking to someone, letting them know, you know, do you understand that those birds are resting, that they need to be resting, they're maybe digesting their food. You might think about not doing that. Because in the winter, these birds don't really have a roped off areas. And so I think one of the goals of the Black Skimmer working group and some of the telemetry work that we're going to do that it has been done by Kate and others is to really highlight which of these sites are super important for skimmers and their conservation to be able to maybe get some protections for those. And also, if you like to photograph birds, you know, just always be cautious about your approaching them. Be mindful of their behavior. Are they giving you some indications? Are they moving away from you? Then you probably need to back off. I can tell you that a lot of these coastal birds, if you sit down, you're far less of a threat from them. And start from a distance away and inch forward is usually the best way to do it. But if they're dive bombing you, it's pretty clear that you're too close. So with that, I think we're ready to take questions. If you have any, you can type them in the chat. If you want to support our project, you can scan that QR code. And I will look at the chat and see if anybody has any questions for us. We had Cynthia asked how large our population was, and Liz noted that it's been around 20 to 30 pairs. And I can, if you raise your hand, I can also unmute you and you can ask a question too if you'd like to. No questions? If not, then I think you can also, our emails are here, and if you email us with any questions you might have. So with that, I think we'll sign off. And I hope you guys enjoyed the lunchtime webinar. And oh, I see one there. Let's see. You're welcome. Lindsay says, we saw about 50 skimmers in a flock on the island of Holbox on the north shore of the Yucatan. Oh. Would they stay there or have migrated there? When you're down in the Yucatan, Lindsay, Allison, you are looking at more of the skimmers that are more resident down in South America. They're basically there year round and they nest in the riverine environments. So those birds are not as migratory. Uh, they're not migratory like ours. Yeah. Any other questions? You're welcome. I'm glad this worked out. Hope it was helpful. Hope to see you out in the field this spring. All right, everybody.